We have now reached Tier 4, the Horror Expert. While there are still some films on this tier that I have personally seen, this is now the first tier that features some films I've never heard of. Starting off Tier 4 is Paper House, released in 1988, directed by Bernard Rose. This is a dramatic fantasy that tells the story of a young girl lost in the loneliness and boredom of reality who finds solace in an ill boy. She discovers that she can visit this boy in a surreal dream world that she drew in her school composition book. The film score was one of the first composed by the legendary Hans Zimmer. Altered States, released in 1980, directed by Ken Russell. This sci-fi psychological horror film tells the story of a physiologist, played by William Hurt in his feature film debut, who experiments with drugs and a sensory deprivation tank, and he has visions he believes are genetic memories. The film's box office failure, Ken Russell's on-set drunkenness, and his row with screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky led to the director becoming a virtual pariah in Hollywood. Hour of the Wolf, released in 1968, directed by Ingmar Bergman. This is a personal favorite of mine. The film stars Max von Sydow and Liv Ullmann. This psychological mystery is Bergman's only horror film. It tells the story of an artist who, while vacationing on a remote German island with his younger pregnant wife, has an emotional breakdown while confronting his repressed desires. Regarding the title, Bergman defines The Hour of the Wolf as, quote, "the time between midnight and dawn when most people die, when sleep is deepest, when nightmares are most palatable. It is the hour when the sleepless are pursued by their sharpest anxieties, when ghosts and demon hold sway." City of the Living Dead, released in 1980, directed by Lucio Fulci. This Italian zombie film is occasionally called by its alternative title, The Gates of Hell. When a priest hangs himself, it somehow opens the gates of hell, allowing the dead to rise. It is then up to a reporter and a psychic who team up in an attempt to close them. Mad God, released in 2021, directed by Phil Tippett. At over 30 years in the making, this stop-motion animation is the work of pure artistry. In it, the main character, called the Assassin, travels through a nightmare underworld of tortured souls, ruined cities, and wretched monstrosities. The Cell, released in 2000, directed by Tarsum Singh. Starring Jennifer Lopez, who plays Catherine Dean, a psychotherapist who is part of a revolutionary new treatment which allows her mind to literally enter the mind of her patients. Now, Catherine must race against time to explore the twisted mind of the serial killer, but his damaged personality poses dangers that threaten to overwhelm her. The next title, Mother, could refer to one of two films. The first one, released in 2009 from South Korea, directed by Bong Joon-ho, tells the story of a mother who desperately searches for the killer who framed her son for a girl's horrific murder. There is also Mother, released in 2017, directed by Darren Aronofsky. This is part horror film and part biblical allegory. The film deals with a couple whose relationship is tested when uninvited guests arrive at their home, disrupting their tranquil existence. And that brief description barely does the film justice. As somebody who is often a fan of religious horror, I really appreciated the unique take and presentation that Aronofsky's film offered. Possession, released in 1981, directed by Andrei Zulawski. If you've never seen this, I can't recommend it enough. I can honestly tell you, you've never seen anything quite like it before. This movie is wild. Led by a powerhouse performance from Isabelle Adjani, she plays a woman who starts exhibiting increasingly disturbing behavior after asking her husband, played by Sam Neill, for a divorce. Suspicions of infidelity soon give way to something much more sinister. Adjani's performance in the film's iconic subway scene is absolutely unhinged and truly unlike anything I've seen before. The next films on the iceberg are just listed as the Exorcist sequels. Now, I'm not going to spend the time to go through them all individually and give you a plot breakdown. However, this is a franchise I have reviewed on my channel, and figured I'd give you a quick review for each of the films. Starting with Exorcist II: The Heretic. This is genuinely one of the 2 or 3 worst films I think I have reviewed on my channel. There are really no redeeming qualities, and this film is painfully boring. The Exorcist III, This is one of the best hidden gems and most underrated films I have seen in recent time. I absolutely adored this thing. I think the performance by George C. Scott is great, and Brad Dourif is absolutely phenomenal. Highly recommend. Exorcist: The Beginning. This is pretty much standard Hollywood jump scare fare. There's not really much more to add. Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. This was a film that was unfortunately hurt by studio interference, as Paul Schrader's original vision, I think, could have produced a pretty great film, as he wanted to make the film more of a character study focused in on Father Merrin. And I think the film that we got is pretty good. Unfortunately, we didn't get the true vision of Paul Schrader. And to me, this is a classic example of a great what if. What if the studio would have butted out and just allowed Schrader to make the film he wanted to make? I think we could have gotten something significantly better than we did. The Exorcist Believer. This is a pointless, unnecessary studio cash grab that has really no reason to exist. William Castle films. William Castle was an American producer, director, screenwriter, and actor. He acquired a reputation for being able to churn out competent B-movies quickly and on budget. He is most well known for promoting his films using gimmicks, such as in his film The Tingler starring Vincent Price. In The Tingler, the title character is a creature that attaches itself to a human spinal cord. It is activated by fright and can be destroyed only by screaming. During the production, Castle purchased military surplus airplane wing de-icers, consisting of vibrating motors, and had a crew travel from theater to theater, attaching them to the undersides of some of the seats. In the finale, one of the creatures is said to have gotten loose in the theater itself. The buzzers were activated as the film star Vincent Price warned the audience to, quote, "Scream, scream for your lives." The Driller Killer. Released in 1979, a slasher film directed by Abel Ferrara. In The Driller Killer, an artist slowly goes insane while struggling to pay his bills, work on his paintings, and care for his two female roommates, which leads him to taking to the streets of New York after dark and randomly killing derelicts with a power drill. An interesting bit of trivia I found is that this film could have easily escaped the UK's Video Nasty list if the original PVRA video cover wasn't so graphic. It featured a very bloody close-up of a drill boring into a man's head with lots of blood. The video cover was featured in video catalogs and received many complaints. The Legend of Boggy Creek, released in 1972. This G-rated horror mystery was actually one of the very first mockumentary films. It tells the story of the mythical Fouke monster, a Bigfoot-type creature that has been sighted in and around Fouke, Arkansas since the 1950s. The film is based on actual reported encounters with a Bigfoot creature in the Fouke Boggy Creek area of Arkansas throughout the 60s and early 70s. Most of the actors in the film were the actual people from the encounters. V, released in 1967. This dark fantasy folk horror was produced in the Soviet Union. In it, a young priest is ordered to preside over the wake of a witch in a small old wooden church of a remote village. This means spending 3 nights alone with the corpse, with only his faith to protect him. The title, V, refers to the name of a demon who haunts the young priest. Session 9, released in 2001, directed by Brad Anderson. In Session 9, tensions rise within an asbestos cleaning crew as they work in an abandoned mental hospital with a horrific past that seems to be coming back. Actor David Caruso reports in the official production notes that he saw, quote, "something pass my window," when shooting inside the Bonner Medical Building of Danvers State Hospital. Quote, "I didn't want to tell anybody because people would start looking at me strangely." Also, actor Peter Mullen reports strange happenings on the set. He claims that while filming on the roof, a voice in his head told him to jump off to see what would happen. Mullen said the building brought out a morbid kind of, quote, "overactive curiosity." Onibaba, released in 1964, directed by Kaneto Shindo. A Japanese folk horror. After being forcefully inducted as a soldier into war in 14th century Japan, A man's wife and mother remain living in a swamp. They eke out their living by ambushing worn-out warriors, killing them, and selling their belongings to a greedy merchant. The woman comes to mistrust her daughter-in-law, who has coupled up with a deserter and begins to wear a facial mask she has taken from a slain samurai. In this disguise, she is first taken for a demon by her daughter. Onibaba's literal meaning is demon hag or old devil woman. The demon mask used in the movie inspired William Friedkin to use a similar design for the makeup in subliminal shots of a white-faced demon in The Exorcist. Life Force, released in 1985, directed by Tobe Hooper. I was surprised given the director. I have actually never heard of this film, and it sounds pretty crazy. In Life Force, a space shuttle mission investigating Halley's Comet brings back a malevolent race of space vampires who transform most of London's population into zombies. The only survivor of the expedition, along with British authorities, attempt to capture a mysterious but beautiful alien woman who appears responsible. And I have to say, that is one of the more wild plots I've heard in a while. I might have to check this one out pretty soon. Society, released in 1989, directed by Brian Yuzna. A darkly comedic takedown of the social elite. In Society, lead character Bill is worried that he is different to his sister and parents. They mix with other upper-class people while Bill is more down-to-earth. Even his girlfriend seems a bit odd. However, all is revealed when Bill returns home to find a party in full swing. This is another film well known for its body horror. The infamous shunting scene is one of the more twisted and all-around messed up scenes I've ever had the pleasure of viewing. Deep Red, released in 1975, directed by Dario Argento. Quintessential giallo, Deep Red is often credited, along with Suspiria, as being Argento's masterpiece. In it, a jazz pianist witnesses a bloody murder of a psychic who lives in his building. Disturbed by his inability to understand the significance of a detail he saw at the scene of the crime, he partners with a journalist in an attempt to solve the mystery. One of the unique aspects of Deep Red is the way in which some of the characters die. Co-writer Bernardino Zapponi said the inspiration behind the murder scenes came from him and Argento thinking of painful injuries that the audience could relate to. He says, basically not everyone knows the pain of being shot by a gun, but everyone has at some point accidentally struck furniture or been scalded by hot water. And the final entry in Tier 4 is Tombs of the Blind Dead, released in 1972, directed by Armando de Osorio, a Spanish zombie film. In medieval times, a group of renegade knights were executed for their black magic rituals. In 1970s Portugal, vacationing college kids fall prey to the knights' zombified corpses, resurrected from the dead to feast on the blood of the living. And that concludes Tier 4 on the horror iceberg. And as we journey down a little bit further into Tier 5, we have the horror cultist tier. And kicking things off, we have Nightbreed, directed by Clive Barker, released in 1990. Nightbreed is a part slasher and part dark fantasy film based on Barker's own novel titled Cabal. In the film, a troubled young man is drawn to a mythical place called Midian, where a variety of friendly monsters are hiding from humanity. Meanwhile, a sadistic serial killer is looking for a patsy. Clive Barker has gone on record as saying that he felt that the distributor Fox and the financiers never understood the film and simply cut the story to pieces so it would fit what their idea of the picture should have been. However, fortunately enough for fans, in July of 2014, Scream Factory released the Cabal Cut, a director's cut version of the film approved under Barker's supervision. Wolfen, released in 1981, directed by Michael Madley. Wolfen stars Albert Finney and Edward James Olmos. In the film, a city cop is assigned to solve a bizarre set of violent murders where it appears that the victims were killed by animals. In his pursuit, he learns of an Indian legend about wolf spirits. The film was the first movie to use a thermographic visual photographic look to represent the point of view of a character, in this case, the Wolfen. This type of effect shot has been used in a number of movies since then to show the POV of a character. One notable example popularizing this kind of visual effects perspective is used in the Predator films. The Shout, released in 1978. The film tells the story of Crossley, a mysterious traveling man who invades the lives of a young couple. The couple provides hospitality to Crossley, but his intentions are gradually revealed as more sinister. Crossley claims he has learned from an Aboriginal shaman how to produce a terror shout that can kill anyone who hears it unprotected. This movie was notable in its time for its use of an electronic and avant-garde musical score, and reportedly 40 different musical tracks were used for the sound. Blood Feast, released in 1963, directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis. In Blood Feast, an Egyptian caterer kills various women in suburban Miami to use their body parts to revive a dormant Egyptian goddess, while an inept police detective tries to track him down. The movie was shot in 9 days for roughly $25,000, and this is the oldest film on the UK's list of the video nasties. Another interesting bit of trivia that I discovered is this is considered by Stephen King to be the worst horror movie he's ever seen. Eden Log, released in 2007, a French sci-fi horror. In Eden Log, a man wakes up in an underground cave next to a dead body. He has no memory of how he got there and starts to try and work his way to the surface and escape from the network of tunnels, which seem to be some kind of ancient civilization. Nosferatu, released in 1979, directed by Werner Herzog, starring Isabelle Adjani, Bruno Ganz, and Klaus Kinski as Count Dracula. In Herzog's adaptation, Count Dracula moves from Transylvania to Wismar, spreading the Black Plague across the land. Only a woman pure of heart can bring an end to his reign of horror. During filming, Kinski had to spend approximately 4 hours a day in the makeup chair and was so disturbed by his appearance in the makeup he avoided looking at himself in the mirror. Furthermore, since Herzog wanted a more restrained performance from Kinski, who wanted to play the role as more energetic, Herzog would often provoke Kinski into a massive tantrum so he would be exhausted when the time came to shoot his scenes. Mark of the Devil, released in 1970, a German folk horror film. In 1700s Austria, a witch hunter's apprentice has doubts about the righteousness of witch hunting when he witnesses the brutality, the injustice, the falsehood, the torture, and the arbitrary killing that go with the job. The US distributors of this film, Hallmark Releasing, advertised it as, quote, guaranteed to make you sick, and backed it up with thousands of vomit bags advertising the film. Street Trash, released in 1987, directed by J. Michael Monroe. A darkly comedic body horror film tells the story of a liquor store owner who sells alcoholic beverages to homeless people, unaware of what the bottles actually contain: toxic brew. Experiment in Evil, released in 1959, directed by Jean Renoir. A French sci-fi horror, occasionally referred to by its alternative title, The Doctor's Horrible Experiment. The film is a retelling of the 1886 novella Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, set in the 1950s France. The Mask of Fu Manchu, released in 1932, starring the great Boris Karloff. In Mask of Fu Manchu, Englishmen race to find the tomb of Genghis Khan. They have to get there fast as the evil genius Dr. Fu Manchu is also searching, and if he gets the mysteriously powerful relic, he and his diabolical daughter will enslave the world. Jean Rollin films. Jean Rollin was a French film director, actor, and novelist best known for his work in the fantastique genre. In a career spanning over 50 years, Rollin's films are noted for their exquisite, if mostly static cinematography, off-kilter plot progression, poetic dialogue, playful surrealism, and recurrent use of well-constructed female lead characters. I'm probably going to mispronounce the next title, but I'll do my best. Urotsuka Doji, released in 1987. This is a Japanese erotic horror manga TV series. And this one I don't want to go too much into detail as it contains quite a bit of sexually graphic content that I don't have much of an interest in covering. But the basic plot is, in the world where the series takes place, there are 3 different species that live on Earth. In addition to humans, there are also the Makai, which is a demon race, and the Jujinkai, a half-man, half-beast race. Once every 3,000 years, a superior being called the Chauji, the Overfiend, will appear and bring balance to all 3 realms. Felidae, released in 1994. This animated mystery thriller is a hard-boiled detective story where the detective is played by a cat named Francis. A cat must investigate brutal murders of other cats in a neighborhood he has moved into with his new owner. The Psycho sequels, and this covers 4 films. Psycho 2, released in 1983. After 22 years of psychiatric care, Norman Bates attempts to return to a life of solitude, but the specters of his crimes and his mother continue to haunt him. Psycho 3, released in 1986. In this film, Norman Bates falls in love with a fallen nun who stays at the Bates Motel alongside a drifter and a curious reporter. Meanwhile, Mother is still watching. Perkins directs this film as well. Psycho 4, The Beginning, released in 1990. This is a TV movie. Norman Bates recalls his childhood with his abusive mother while fearing his unborn child will inherit his split personality disorder. Psycho 4 is most noteworthy for starring a young Henry Thomas who played the teen version of Norman Bates. And finally, Psycho, released in 1998. This is a shot-for-shot remake of Hitchcock's classic, except this time in color and directed by Gus Van Sant. It stars Anne Heche as Marion Crane and Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. And personally, I don't think I've ever heard anything positive about this film, and so I've never really had any desire to watch it. Frankenstein, The True Story, released in 1973. This TV movie tells the story of the brilliant but unorthodox scientist Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who rejects the artificial man that he has created. The creature escapes and later swears revenge. Portrait of Jenny, released in 1948. And I was a little surprised to see this on the iceberg, as it seems to be more of a fantasy romance than a horror film. But the film takes place in Depression-era New York, where an impoverished painter has a chance encounter with an enigmatic, old-fashioned little girl in Central Park who inspires him and changes his destiny. This film essentially marked the end of David O. Selznick's career as a powerhouse Hollywood producer, and he often regretted having embarked on the project. The film went steeply over budget, and its schedule became extremely elongated, and once released, it was a box office flop. Dust Devil, released in 1992, directed by Richard Stanley. This Western slasher film was filmed in the deserts of Namibia. In the film, a woman on the run from her abusive husband encounters a mysterious hitchhiker who turns out to be a shape-shifting spirit the locals call the Dust Devil. Meshes of the Afternoon, released in 1943. A 14-minute, surreal, experimental short film. It tells the story of a woman returning home who falls asleep and has vivid dreams that may or may not be happening in reality. Through repetitive images and complete mismatching of the objective view of time and space, her dark inner desires play out on screen. Meshes of the Afternoon was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress in 1990 due to its cultural and historical significance. The Stone Tape, released in 1972, directed by Peter Sadzi. This was broadcast on BBC Two as a Christmas ghost story in 1972. Combining aspects of science fiction and horror, the story concerns a team of scientists who move into their new research facility, a renovated Victorian mansion that has a reputation for being haunted. The team investigates the phenomenon, trying to determine if the stones of the building are acting as a recording medium for past events. However, their investigations serve only to unleash a darker, more malevolent force. And the final film on Tier 5 is Wait Until Dark, released in 1967, directed by Terrence Young. The film stars Audrey Hepburn and Alan Arkin, and it tells the story of a recently blinded woman who is terrorized by a trio of thugs while they search for a heroin-stuffed doll they believe is in her apartment. In one of his non-fiction books, Stephen King declared this to be the scariest movie of all time, and that Alan Arkin's performance, quote, may be the greatest evocation of screen villainy ever. And now we journey further down the strange and obscure horror movie iceberg, and we reach Tier 6, the horror devotee. Starting off Tier 6, we have The Last Broadcast, released in 1998. In this found footage film, a film crew ventures into the forest in search of the mythical Jersey Devil. The last broadcast was shot for just $900, and it was dubbed the first desktop feature film, which means it was the first movie to be filmed, edited, and screened entirely digitally with no film being involved. Fear X, released in 2003, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn. When his wife is killed in a seemingly random incident, Harry, played by John Turturro, prompted by mysterious visions, journeys to discover the true circumstances surrounding her murder. Unfortunately, due to the film's box office failure, it led to the bankruptcy of Refn's film company, Django Star. The Signal Man, released in 2015. This 15-minute short film is an adaptation of a Charles Dickens story. In the film, a railroad signalman is haunted by a series of strange events. Are they truly ghostly manifestations, or the signalman's psychological response to his isolation and repetitive work? I Eat Your Skin, released in 1971, directed by Del Tenney. In the film, a Playboy adventure novelist joins his publisher on an expedition to Voodoo Island in the Caribbean, where a cancer researcher is being forced to turn the tribespeople into zombies. Originally filmed in 1964, the film sat on the shelf unreleased for 6 years, until it was picked up by a distributor, because the production company needed a horror film to play on the bottom of a double bill with their other film, I Drink Your Blood. The American Nightmare, released in 2000, a horror documentary which is an examination into the nature of 1960s and 70s horror films, the artists involved, and how they reflected contemporary society. This documentary features horror icons such as John Carpenter, George A. Romero, Tom Savini, David Cronenberg, Wes Craven, and Tobe Hooper. I'm probably going to mispronounce this next title. I believe it is Malpertuis. The English translation is The Legend of Doomhouse, released in 1971, directed by Harry Kumel. This is a Belgian fantasy horror film. In the film, a young sailor finds himself trapped in the labyrinthine mansion of his occultist uncle, along with a number of eccentric and mysterious relatives who all seem to be harboring a dark secret. The original title refers to a labyrinth where Greek mythical characters are made prisoners. The film is also noteworthy for featuring a lead performance by the legendary Orson Welles. Little Otik, released in 2000, directed by Jan Svankmajer. Part comedy, part fairy tale, part folk horror, this film out of the Czech Republic is a pretty bizarre one. It tells the story of a childless couple who pass off an anthropomorphous tree stump as their baby, but things get out of hand when the monstrosity comes to life and demands to be fed. Zombie Holocaust, released in 1980. In this Italian zombie film, members of an expedition in the East Indies encounter not only the cannibals they were looking for, but also an evil scientist and his zombie army. This film was banned under the obscenities law in most parts of Europe, and although it was never listed in the UK as an official video nasty, the pre-certified video was seized by Cambridgeshire police, and the dealer was tried under Section 2 of the Obscene Publications Act of 1977, though he was eventually found not guilty, and the film has since been released fully uncut in 2000. At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, released in 1964. This is the first horror film that was produced in Brazil, and it tells the story of a gravedigger who prowls the city in search of a female to bear him a son. The next film is Pana a Netvor, which is Beauty and the Beast, released in 1978. Produced in Czechoslovakia, this gothic rendition of the classic fairy tale tells the story of a merchant's youngest daughter who is held prisoner by a mysterious winged beast. And that is one of the key differences in this adaptation, as the beast is a winged creature. Okay, this next one is going to take me a little bit to fully explain. It's called Cremaster, and it refers to the Cremaster Cycle, which is a series of 5 feature-length films created by American visual artist and filmmaker Matthew Barney. The Cremaster Cycle was made over a period of 8 years, spanning from 1994 to 2002, and it culminated in a major museum exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. The series incorporates a multidisciplinary narrative that heavily references connections between real people, real places, and real things personal to Barney himself, but are all fictionalized to some extent. The cycle includes the films as well as photographs, drawings, sculptures, and installations the artist produced in conjunction with each episode. Its title refers to the male cremaster muscle, which primary function involves the male reproductive area. And if you didn't really understand any of that, which I barely did myself, this is basically just a gigantic experimental film. The Fall of the House of Usher, released in 1982, directed by Jan Svankmajer. This 15-minute short film is an animated version of the Edgar Allan Poe classic story. In the film, a traveler arrives at the Usher mansion to find that the sibling inhabitants are living under a mysterious family curse. The brother's senses have become painfully acute, while his sister has become nearly catatonic. As the visitor's stay at the mansion continues, the effects of the curse reach their terrifying climax, and he must choose between his concern for his host's safety and his own. Andy Milligan films. Andy Milligan was an American playwright, screenwriter, actor, and filmmaker whose work includes 27 movies made between 1965 and 1988. He directed a number of exploitation movies that have become cult favorites with horror film buffs. Simon, King of the Witches, released in 1971, directed by Bruce Kessler. In the film, lead character Simon is one of the few true male witches that exist. His ultimate goal is to leave the earth to become a god, and he attempts to make this happen through magic rituals. The film's misleading advertising campaign created some challenges because it set up the film as a demonic sex orgy film, cashing in on the Charles Manson trials, and that seriously hurt the film at the box office. Snuff, released in 1975. A so-called snuff film involving the exploits of a cult leader leading a gang of bikers in a series of supposedly real killings on film. The opportunistic co-producer Alan Shackleton saw the chance to make a quick buck, so he took an Argentinian low-budget biker film titled The Slaughter, changed its title to Snuff, removed all of its credits, and added a 10-minute epilogue to it that showed the supposed director of The Slaughter finish making the film and suddenly attack one of its female cast members, then kill and disembowel her, all while being filmed by a cameraman. This footage was then passed off as real, even though the atrocious acting and subpar special effects clearly showed that it was phony. Nevertheless, Shackleton arranged a public showing of the film in Times Square, New York. He then told the New York Police Department what was about to be shown and set up a small group of phony protesters. The publicity stunt worked, and Snuff made over $300,000 in 3 weeks. Le Portrait de Petite Cosette, translated to The Portrait of Cosette, is a Japanese anime series released in 2004. The series focuses on a college art student who works in an antique shop. One day, he sees the image of a girl in an antique glass. He learns that her name is Cosette and that she was an aristocrat's daughter during the 18th century. She reveals to him that her spirit has been entrapped within the glass because she was murdered. She then tells the student in order to set her free, a man must be willing to take upon himself the punishment meant for the sins of her killer. Den of Celestial Birds. This is a 13-minute animated short film released in 2006, directed by E. Elias Merhige. This is considered a sequel to his film Begotten. In the film, director Merhige intended to depict, quote, creation in its simplest and purest form. It opens with an intertitle that reads, quote, hello and welcome. Do not be afraid. Be comforted. Remember our origin. Followed by images depicting the Big Bang. Then, after a hyper-accelerated trip through the evolution of life and the Earth, it culminates in the birth of an embryonic pseudo-humanoid named the Son of Light, who reaches towards the sky as the scene fades to a shot of the Earth. Now, is it just me, or does that sound a little bit like the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey? And the final film on Tier 6 is The Mascot. This is a 37-minute stop-motion animation film released in 1933. In the film, a toy-stuffed dog has just been sewn together when it hears a young child ask for an orange. Since the mother has no money to buy the child oranges, the dog takes it upon himself to get the child an orange, and it soon winds up on the street. The dog then picks up an orange from a curbside stand and hopes to take it home to the child. But that night, before the dog can get back to the home, it must face a series of strange and frightening adventures. Well, that concludes tiers 4, 5, and 6 on the strange and obscure horror movie Iceberg. Thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. I also, real quick, want to give a shout out to my patrons. You guys are awesome. Seriously, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. If you got anything out of this video, go ahead and do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.